The lawyer's words still echoed in my head as I stood outside the courthouse, clutching the single manila envelope that contained what remained of my life. Unfortunately, Ms. Rodriguez, your father's will was quite specific. The entire estate goes to your stepmother and her children. You are not mentioned anywhere in the document. 26 years old, holding a master's degree in engineering and $2,000 in my checking account. I watched through the courthouse windows as Miranda, my stepmother, laughed with her twin sons Kyle and Derek. They were already planning their celebration dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town, discussing which European vacation they'd take first with my father's money. 3 months earlier, Dad had died suddenly of a heart attack at 58. I'd been in graduate school, working on my thesis while supporting myself with teaching assistant wages and student loans. Miranda had handled all the funeral arrangements, telling me not to worry about anything, that we'd figure everything out after I finished my degree. What we figured out was that she had systematically poisoned my relationship with my father during his final 2 years, convincing him that I was ungrateful, that I only called when I needed money, that I cared more about my career than my family. None of it was true, but grief and loneliness had made Dad vulnerable to her manipulation. The worst part was discovering that Dad's construction company, Rodriguez and Associates, which he'd always promised would be mine someday, had been quietly transferred to Miranda 6 months before his death. She'd convinced him it was for tax purposes and estate planning. Now she was selling it to the highest bidder, cashing out everything Dad had spent 30 years building. "Isabella," Miranda called from across the courthouse steps, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Sweetheart, I know this is hard, but your father wanted what was best for his family. You're young and educated. You'll be fine." Kyle and Derek flanked her, both wearing expensive suits bought with money that should have helped pay for my student loans. They were 24, had never held real jobs, and had convinced my father to pay for their business degrees from a private college where they'd spent 4 years networking and partying. "Don't look so glum, Izzy," Derek said with a smirk. "You've got that fancy engineering degree. You can build your own empire, right?" They all laughed as they walked away, heading to their celebration lunch in Dad's vintage Mercedes, the same car he'd taught me to drive, the one he'd promised would be mine when I graduated college. I stood there for a long time, watching traffic move through downtown Phoenix, thinking about the options in front of me. I could fight the will, but Dad's lawyer had assured me it was airtight, and I couldn't afford the legal fees anyway. I could wallow in self-pity and bitterness. Or I could do exactly what Derek had mockingly suggested: build my own empire. The first step was finding a place to live. My student apartment lease had expired, and I couldn't afford to renew it without the teaching assistant position I'd lost when I graduated. I ended up renting a studio apartment in the roughest part of town for $600 a month, furnished with items from thrift stores and whatever I could find on Craigslist. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. The elevator rarely worked, the hallways smelled like cigarettes and despair, and my neighbors included a rotating cast of shift workers, students, and people down on their luck. But it was mine, and the rent included utilities, which meant I could afford to eat while I looked for work. Finding a job proved more challenging than I'd expected. The economy was struggling, and most companies wanted experienced engineers, not recent graduates with master's degrees, but no practical work experience. After 6 weeks of rejection letters and disappointing interviews, I finally accepted a position with Morrison Construction, a mid-sized company that specialized in commercial renovation projects. The job paid $38,000 a year, barely enough to cover my rent, student loan payments, and basic living expenses. But it was a start, and Tom Morrison, the company's owner, seemed impressed with my academic credentials and willingness to learn practical construction management. "You've got the technical knowledge," Tom told me during my first week. "Now you need to learn how things actually work in the field." Theory and practice are 2 different animals in this business. I threw myself into the work with desperate intensity. While my coworkers went home at 5 o'clock, I stayed late studying project plans, learning about materials and costs, and researching new construction technologies. I volunteered for every difficult assignment, every problematic project, every job that other people avoided. Meanwhile, Miranda and her sons were living the high life on Dad's money. Through mutual friends and social media, I heard about their expensive vacations, their new luxury cars, their shopping sprees, and country club memberships. Kyle had used his inheritance to buy a franchise restaurant that he barely managed, spending most of his time partying with friends while hired managers did the actual work. Derek had invested in some kind of cryptocurrency scheme that he was sure would make him millions. After 6 months at Morrison Construction, I was promoted to junior project manager and given my first independent assignment, renovating a small office building that had been damaged by flooding. The project was considered a nightmare: tight budget, difficult timeline, and a building with numerous structural problems that previous inspections had missed. "This one's a real test," Tom warned me as he handed over the project files. The previous contractor walked away after discovering foundation issues. The client is frustrated, the budget is blown, and everyone thinks the building might be a total loss. I spent 2 weeks analyzing the structural problems, researching innovative repair techniques, and developing a plan that could salvage the building within the revised budget. The solution involved using a new type of structural reinforcement system that was cheaper than traditional methods, but required precise engineering calculations. The project took 4 months and nearly killed me. I worked 16-hour days, coordinated with dozens of subcontractors, and solved problems that should have required years of experience. But when we finished, the building was not only functional but more structurally sound than it had been before the flood damage. The client was so impressed that they recommended Morrison Construction to 3 other companies. Tom gave me a bonus and another promotion, this time to senior project manager with a salary increase to $52,000. "You've got something special, Isabella," Tom told me during my performance review. "You see solutions where other people see problems. That's a rare gift in this business." But I wasn't satisfied with being an employee, no matter how successful. Every night in my crappy apartment, I worked on my own plans, studying real estate markets, analyzing construction trends, and developing business strategies for starting my own company. The opportunity came 18 months after I'd started at Morrison Construction. A small strip mall on the outskirts of Phoenix had been sitting vacant for 2 years after the original developer had gone bankrupt during construction. The building was roughly 60% complete, with major structural work finished but interior systems and finishes left undone. I spent weeks researching the property, analyzing market conditions, and developing financial projections. The asking price was $200,000, far more than I could afford, but potentially worth over $1 million if completed properly and leased to the right tenants. My plan was audacious: convince Tom Morrison to partner with me on purchasing and completing the property, with me managing the project in exchange for a 50% ownership stake. I would contribute my construction management expertise and take responsibility for all project execution, while Tom would provide the initial capital and serve as a silent partner. "You want me to invest $200,000 in a failed construction project with a 27-year-old who's been in the business for less than 2 years, Tom summarized after I'd presented my proposal. "Yes," I replied, "because that 27-year-old just saved your company over $300,000 on the Meridian project, and because I've identified exactly why the original developer failed and how to avoid those mistakes." Tom studied my financial projections and construction timeline for what felt like hours. Finally, he looked up with a slight smile. "If we do this, you're risking everything. If the project fails, you'll be worse off than when you started. Are you sure you want to take that chance?" "I'm already worse off than when I started," I replied. "I've got nothing left to lose and everything to gain." We formed Rodriguez Morrison Development LLC the following week. I quit my job at Morrison Construction to focus full-time on completing the strip mall, living off my savings while throwing everything I had into making the project successful. The next 8 months were the hardest of my life. I managed every aspect of the construction personally, working 18-hour days, and sleeping in a trailer on the job site to save money on rent. I negotiated with subcontractors, solved technical problems, and dealt with permit issues and inspection delays. But I also learned more about construction, project management, and business development in those 8 months than I could have learned in 5 years as an employee. By the time we completed this strip mall, I understood every aspect of the development process from initial planning to final occupancy. The project was a complete success. We finished construction on time and 15% under budget, then leased all 6 retail spaces within 3 months of completion. The property generated enough rental income to pay off our construction loan within 2 years, and Tom and I each walked away with over $400,000 in equity. More importantly, I had proven to myself and the local business community that I could successfully manage complex development projects. Within 6 months, 3 other property owners had approached me about potential partnerships. Meanwhile, my stepfamily's fortunes were heading in the opposite direction. Kyle's restaurant franchise had failed spectacularly after he'd ignored basic business fundamentals in favor of expensive marketing gimmicks and celebrity chef consultants. Derek's cryptocurrency investments had collapsed along with the market, wiping out most of his inheritance. Miranda was still living comfortably, but her spending habits were unsustainable, and she'd already started selling off Dad's valuable possessions to maintain her lifestyle. 2 years after completing my first development project, I had established Rodriguez Development as one of the most respected small construction companies in Phoenix. We specialized in complex renovation and redevelopment projects that other companies avoided, the kind of challenging jobs that required both technical expertise and creative problem-solving. My personal life had improved dramatically as well. I'd moved out of the terrible apartment into a modest but comfortable condo that I'd purchased with my share of the strip mall profits. I'd paid off my student loans, established a substantial emergency fund, and was reinvesting most of my earnings into growing the business. The breakthrough came when the city of Phoenix announced plans to revitalize the downtown warehouse district, offering tax incentives and development grants for companies willing to convert abandoned industrial buildings into mixed-use residential and commercial spaces. I saw the opportunity immediately. The warehouse district was full of beautiful old buildings with good bones but terrible infrastructure. Most developers were avoiding the area because of the technical challenges and uncertain market conditions. But I had built my reputation on solving exactly those kinds of problems. I spent 3 months researching the district, analyzing market trends, and developing relationships with city planners and community leaders. Then I submitted a proposal to purchase and redevelop a complex of 3 connected warehouse buildings that had been vacant for over a decade. My plan was to convert the buildings into 48 loft apartments and 12 ground-floor commercial spaces, creating a mixed-use development that would serve as an anchor for the broader district revitalization. The project would require a total investment of $8 million, far more than I could finance personally, but manageable with the right combination of bank loans, city incentives, and private investors. The challenge was convincing banks and investors that a 29-year-old woman with 3 years of development experience could successfully manage an $8 million project. I spent months presenting my proposal to dozens of potential financiers, facing skepticism, condescension, and outright rejection. This is a very ambitious project for someone with your limited experience, one bank vice president told me during a particularly frustrating meeting. Perhaps you should consider starting with something smaller and working your way up to projects of this magnitude. But I had learned something important during my years of struggle. Persistence and preparation could overcome almost any obstacle. For every person who told me the project was too big or too risky, I found another who was impressed by my detailed planning and comprehensive market analysis. The breakthrough came when Sarah Chen, a successful real estate investor who had been following my work, agreed to provide $2 million in private financing in exchange for a 30% ownership stake in the project. Her investment attracted additional funding from 2 other investors, and the bank suddenly became much more interested in providing construction loans. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago," Sarah told me as we signed the partnership agreement. "Young, hungry, and tired of people telling you what you can't do." Those are exactly the qualities that create successful entrepreneurs. Construction on the warehouse project began 6 months later. Unlike my previous developments, this one required a team of over 100 workers and coordination with dozens of subcontractors and suppliers. I had to learn project management on a completely different scale, while maintaining the attention to detail that had made my smaller projects successful. The technical challenges were enormous. The buildings were over 80 years old, with outdated electrical and plumbing systems, structural issues that required creative engineering solutions, and environmental concerns that demanded careful remediation. We discovered problems almost daily that required quick thinking and innovative solutions. But I had assembled an excellent team of subcontractors and specialists who shared my commitment to quality and problem solving. We developed a culture of collaboration and continuous improvement that allowed us to tackle challenges that would have defeated less cohesive teams. 18 months after breaking ground, the Phoenix Warehouse District opened to national attention. Architectural magazines featured our innovative approach to historic preservation and adaptive reuse. All 48 apartments were leased within 3 months, with a waiting list of over 200 prospective tenants. The commercial spaces attracted a diverse mix of restaurants, galleries, and boutique retailers that created exactly the kind of vibrant community atmosphere we had envisioned. The financial success was equally impressive. The project generated over $3 million in profit, with my personal share exceeding $2 million. More importantly, the development had established my reputation as one of the Southwest's most innovative and capable developers. By this time, Miranda's financial situation had become desperate. She had burned through most of Dad's money and was struggling to maintain her expensive lifestyle. Kyle was working as a bartender after his restaurant failure, and Derek was living in Miranda's guest house while trying to rebuild his finances with a series of failed business ventures. I heard about their problems through the same social network that had once brought me news of their extravagant spending. Friends and former colleagues would mention seeing Miranda at discount stores instead of high-end boutiques, or Kyle working double shifts to pay for basic expenses. Part of me felt vindicated by their reversal of fortune, but mostly I felt sad for the opportunities they had wasted and the relationships they had damaged through their selfishness and short-sightedness. The real validation came when the Phoenix Business Journal named me their Young Entrepreneur of the Year and featured Rodriguez Development on the cover of their annual development issue. The article described my journey from inheritance dispute to business success, though I had requested that they minimize details about my family situation. Isabella Rodriguez represents the best of American entrepreneurship, the article concluded. She transformed personal adversity into professional opportunity, creating value for her community while building a successful business based on innovation and excellence. 3 days after the article was published, I received a phone call that I had been both expecting and dreading for years. Isabella? This is Miranda. I saw the article in the Business Journal. Congratulations on your success. Her voice carried none of the dismissive superiority I remembered from our courthouse encounter 4 years earlier. She sounded tired, perhaps even defeated. Thank you, I replied, waiting to see what she really wanted. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. I have something I need to discuss with you, something about your father and the will. The meeting took place at a small cafe in Old Town Scottsdale, far from the upscale establishments where Miranda used to hold court with her society friends. She looked older than her 53 years, with stress lines around her eyes and clothes that were still expensive, but clearly not recent purchases. I need to tell you something that I should have told you years ago, Miranda began after we'd ordered coffee. Your father never wanted to leave you out of his will. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean? I mean that I convinced him to change his will by lying about you. I told him that you had said terrible things about him, that you were only interested in his money, that you blamed him for your mother's death. None of it was true, but he was grieving and lonely, and he believed me. Miranda's confession poured out in a rush of guilt and regret. She had systematically manipulated my father's perception of our relationship, intercepting phone calls and messages, relaying fabricated stories about my supposed ingratitude, and gradually convincing him that I didn't deserve to inherit his life's work. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, struggling to process the emotions that were flooding through me. Because I've lost everything, Miranda replied with brutal honesty. The money is gone, my sons are struggling, and I'm facing bankruptcy. But mostly because I can't live with the guilt anymore. Your father loved you more than anything in the world, and I destroyed that relationship for my own selfish reasons. She pulled out a manila envelope, similar to the one I'd received at the courthouse 4 years earlier. I found these in your father's desk after he died. I hid them because they proved how much he regretted changing his will. The envelope contained letters my father had written but never sent. Letters expressing his love for me, his pride in my accomplishments, and his growing doubts about the decisions he had made regarding his estate. The final letter, dated just weeks before his death, revealed his plan to change his will back to include me as the primary beneficiary. He was going to call you the day he died, Miranda said, tears streaming down her face. He had scheduled an appointment with his lawyer to revise the will again. He wanted to give you the business and make things right between you. Reading my father's words, understanding how much he had loved me and how manipulated he had been, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and grief. The inheritance I had lost was nothing compared to the relationship with my father that Miranda had stolen from both of us. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally. "Nothing," Miranda replied. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to know the truth about your father's love for you." She stood to leave, then turned back with one final comment. "For what it's worth, I think your father would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. You built something real and lasting, something that matters. That's the kind of success he always valued most." After Miranda left, I sat in the cafe for over an hour, processing everything she had told me. The confirmation that my father had loved me was healing, but it also highlighted the tragic waste of our lost relationship. More importantly, I realized that the path I had taken, building my success through hard work, innovation, and ethical business practices, was exactly what my father would have wanted for me. He had always valued accomplishment over inheritance, character over comfort. Rodriguez's development continued to grow over the following years. We expanded into other markets throughout the Southwest, specializing in complex urban redevelopment projects that transformed abandoned or underutilized properties into vibrant community assets. By my 35th birthday, the company employed over 200 people and had completed more than 50 major development projects. We had pioneered new approaches to sustainable construction, affordable housing development, and historic preservation that were being studied and replicated by developers across the country. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of success was the impact our projects had on the communities where we worked. The Warehouse District development had sparked a broader revitalization of downtown Phoenix, creating thousands of jobs and dozens of new businesses. Our affordable housing projects had provided quality homes for families who had been priced out of traditional housing markets. The financial success was substantial as well. Rodriguez's development was valued at over $40 million, making me one of the youngest successful real estate developers in the Southwest. But the money had never been the primary motivation. It was the proof that ethical business practices and community-focused development could be both profitable and socially beneficial. Kyle and Derek had eventually gotten their lives back on track, though neither achieved anything close to the success they had enjoyed with their inherited wealth. Kyle became a competent restaurant manager and eventually opened a small cafe that reflected hard-earned lessons about business fundamentals. Derek found work in financial planning, helping other people avoid the investment mistakes that had cost him his inheritance. Miranda declared bankruptcy and moved to a modest apartment, taking a job with a nonprofit organization that helped other people navigate financial crises. She had sent me a holiday card each year, always with a brief note expressing her continued remorse and her pride in my accomplishments. 10 years after that first courthouse encounter, I established the Rodriguez Foundation, using a portion of my business profits to provide scholarships and business development support for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. The foundation's mission was to ensure that other people wouldn't have to overcome the same obstacles I had faced in building their careers and pursuing their dreams. The foundation's first major initiative was a partnership with local universities to provide engineering scholarships for students from low-income families. The program also included mentorship and internship opportunities that would give students practical experience to complement their academic learning. During the foundation's inaugural scholarship ceremony, I found myself thinking about the two paths that had diverged from that courthouse steps 4 years earlier. My stepfamily had chosen the easy path of inherited wealth and leisure, while I had been forced onto the difficult path of hard work and self-reliance. At the time, their choice had seemed like the obvious winner. They had money, comfort, and freedom while I had struggle, uncertainty, and sacrifice. But the easy path had led to waste, failure, and regret, while the difficult path had led to accomplishment, purpose, and genuine prosperity. The greatest gift my father gave me, I told the scholarship recipients during my speech, wasn't money or property or connections. It was the belief that success comes from what you build, not what you inherit. Everything valuable in life, relationships, skills, character, achievement, has to be earned through effort and commitment. As I looked out at the young faces in the audience, I realized that the empire I had built wasn't just Rodriguez's development, or the properties we had created, or the money we had earned. It was the example I could provide that adversity could be transformed into opportunity, that setbacks could become comebacks, and that the people who try to leave you with nothing often end up giving you the motivation to build everything. They had left me with nothing, and in doing so, they had given me the greatest gift possible, the chance to discover what I was truly capable of achieving on my own terms, through my own efforts, and according to my own values. The party was over for them long ago, but the empire I built from their rejection was just getting started. 5 years after establishing the Rodriguez Foundation, I stood in the penthouse office of Rodriguez Tower, the 30-story mixed-use development that had become the crown jewel of our portfolio and the tallest building in downtown Phoenix's revitalized core. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see a dozen other projects we had completed, transforming the city skyline. My assistant, David Kim, knocked on the door and entered with his usual efficiency. "Ms. Rodriguez, the mayor's office just called. They want to discuss the Riverside District proposal, and there's something else, a rather unusual request for a meeting." "What kind of unusual request?" "Kyle Morrison would like to schedule an appointment. He says he has a business proposition that might interest you." Kyle Morrison. My stepbrother, who I hadn't spoken to since Miranda's confession 6 years earlier. After his restaurant failure and subsequent years working in food service, he had managed to rebuild his life and was now running a small but successful catering company that specialized in corporate events. Did he say what kind of business proposition? Something about a restaurant concept for one of your developments. He was quite respectful and professional. Said he understood if you weren't interested, but hoped you might give him 5 minutes to present his idea. I stared out at the city below, considering the request. Kyle had been part of the family that had stolen my inheritance and mocked my ambitions. But he had also paid a heavy price for those choices, and apparently learned from his mistakes. Schedule the meeting for next week, I decided. 30 minutes, not 5. If he's serious about business, he deserves a proper hearing. David nodded and made a note on his tablet. Also, the Times reporter will be here at 2 o'clock for the feature story interview. And Sandra Chen called to confirm dinner tomorrow night. She has some new investment opportunities she wants to discuss. Sandra Chen had become more than just an early investor in my warehouse project. She had become a mentor, friend, and frequent business partner. Together, we had formed Pacific Coast Development, a joint venture that was expanding Rodriguez Development's reach into California and Nevada markets. The growth had been extraordinary. Rodriguez Development now operated in 6 states, employed over 800 people, and had completed more than 200 projects valued at over $2 billion. We had pioneered new models for sustainable urban development, affordable housing integration, and community-centered commercial design. But success had also brought new challenges and responsibilities. As the company grew larger, it became harder to maintain the personal touch and innovative culture that had defined our early projects. We were now big enough to attract national attention from competitors, regulators, and critics who scrutinized every decision we made. The interview with the Times reporter was part of a major feature story about women in commercial real estate development. The reporter, Jessica Walsh, had been following my career for several years and was particularly interested in how my personal background had influenced my business philosophy. "Your company has a reputation for taking on projects that other developers won't touch," Jessica said as she settled into the conference room chair across from me. "Abandoned buildings in troubled neighborhoods, complex historic preservation challenges, mixed-income housing that combines market rate and affordable units. What drives that focus?" I learned early in my career that the most interesting opportunities often look like problems to other people, I replied. Buildings that have been abandoned or neglected usually have good bones and great locations. They just need someone willing to see their potential and do the hard work of realizing it. But there's clearly more to it than just business opportunity. Your developments consistently prioritize community impact over maximum profit. That's unusual in commercial real estate. Jessica was right, of course. Rodriguez Development had turned down dozens of projects that would have been more profitable but less beneficial to the communities where we worked. We had pioneered profit-sharing arrangements with local contractors, established job training programs for unemployed residents, and created community spaces within our developments that weren't required by zoning but enhanced neighborhood life. I think business success should be measured by more than just financial returns, I explained. The most satisfying projects are ones that solve real problems for real people while still generating sustainable profits. It's harder to achieve, but it's more meaningful and ultimately more sustainable. Your story has been described as a classic American success narrative, overcoming family betrayal and financial hardship to build a business empire. But critics argue that your emphasis on social responsibility is just sophisticated marketing for wealthy clients who want to feel good about their real estate investments. The criticism wasn't new, and it wasn't entirely unfair. Some of our clients were indeed motivated by social consciousness as much as financial returns. But the accusation that our community focus was just marketing strategy missed the deeper truth about what drove our business decisions. I'd invite those critics to visit some of our projects and talk to the people who live and work there, I replied. You can't fake the kind of community transformation we've helped create. Either the results are real or they're not. Jessica spent another hour asking about specific projects, business strategies, and future plans. But her final question caught me off guard with its personal directness. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if your stepfamily hadn't manipulated your father's will? If you had inherited his construction company instead of having to build your own? I considered the question carefully before answering. I think I would have been successful, but probably not as successful as I've become through building everything from scratch. Inherited businesses often struggle because the next generation hasn't had to learn the hard lessons that created the original success. I had to master every aspect of development and construction through trial and error, which gave me insights I never would have gained as an heir. After Jessica left, I spent the afternoon reviewing plans for our next major project, a mixed-use development in Las Vegas that would transform a 40-acre site near downtown into a sustainable community featuring residential, commercial, and public spaces. The project represented everything we had learned about community-centered development over the past decade. But it also represented new challenges. Las Vegas had different market dynamics, different political structures, and different community needs than the Southwest markets where we had built our reputation. Success would require adapting our proven methods to unfamiliar circumstances. The following week, Kyle arrived for his appointment exactly on time, carrying a professional-looking presentation folder and wearing a suit that suggested modest success without ostentation. He was 36 now, with premature gray at his temples and the kind of practical confidence that comes from years of hard work rather than inherited privilege. Isabella, thank you for agreeing to meet with me, he began, his tone respectful but not deferential. I know our family history makes this awkward, but I hope you'll consider my proposal on its business merits. I'm listening, I replied, gesturing for him to sit down at the conference table. Kyle's presentation was surprisingly sophisticated. He had identified an opportunity to create a new kind of restaurant concept, specifically designed for mixed-use developments, like the ones Rodriguez development specialized in. Instead of traditional standalone restaurants, his concept would integrate food service with community gathering spaces, co-working areas, and event hosting capabilities. The idea came from observing how people actually use the commercial spaces in your developments, Kyle explained. They're not just looking for places to eat. They're looking for places to connect, work, celebrate, and build community. A restaurant that serves those broader needs could be more successful and more valuable to the development overall. His financial projections were realistic, his market research was thorough, and his operational plan demonstrated genuine understanding of restaurant management fundamentals. More importantly, the concept aligned perfectly with Rodriguez Development's community-focused philosophy. This is actually a strong proposal, I admitted after he'd finished his presentation. But I have to ask, why bring this to me instead of approaching other developers or investors? Kyle's expression became more serious. Because I know the quality of your developments and the kind of communities you create. This concept would work in other settings, but it would thrive in yours. And because... He paused, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to say. Because I owe you an apology that's 15 years overdue. What we did to you after Dad died was inexcusable. You deserved better from your family, and you definitely deserved better from me personally. The apology was clearly genuine, but I wasn't interested in rehashing old grievances. Kyle, I appreciate the apology, but let's focus on the business opportunity. If we move forward with this, it would be because the concept has merit, not because of family history. I understand, and I want you to know that I'm prepared to start small and prove the concept works before asking for any significant commitment. I'm not looking for charity or special treatment. I'm looking for a business partnership with someone whose judgment and standards I respect. We spent another hour discussing implementation details, financial structures, and timeline considerations. By the end of the meeting, I was convinced that Kyle's restaurant concept could add significant value to our developments while providing him with a legitimate business opportunity. I'm going to propose a pilot program, I told him as the meeting concluded. We'll include your restaurant concept in our upcoming Riverside District project in Phoenix. Small scale, limited investment, clear performance metrics. If it works, we can discuss expanding the partnership. Kyle's relief and gratitude were visible, but he maintained his professional composure. That's more than fair. I won't disappoint you. After Kyle left, I found myself reflecting on the strange trajectory that had brought us to this point. 15 years ago, he had been the privileged stepson mocking my prospects while inheriting wealth he hadn't earned. Now he was the experienced restaurant operator proposing a legitimate business partnership while I controlled a development empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The reversal of fortunes was complete. But more importantly, both of us had learned valuable lessons from our respective journeys. Kyle had discovered that sustainable success required hard work, humility, and genuine value creation. I had learned that business success was most meaningful when it served broader purposes than personal enrichment. The Riverside District project became our testing ground for the integrated restaurant concept. Kyle's team created a space that was part cafe, part co-working area, part event venue, and part community center. The concept proved immediately popular with residents and visitors, generating higher revenue per square foot than traditional restaurant tenants, while creating the kind of social hub that enhanced the entire development's appeal. 6 months after the Riverside location opened, Kyle presented plans for expanding the concept to 3 more Rodriguez development projects. His business had grown from a one-location experiment to a small but promising restaurant group with unique expertise in community-centered food service. You've created something genuinely innovative, I told Kyle during our quarterly partnership review. This isn't just a successful restaurant concept, it's a new model for how commercial spaces can serve community needs. I learned from the best, Kyle replied with a smile. Watching what you've built with Rodriguez Development taught me that the most sustainable business success comes from solving real problems for real people. The partnership with Kyle had unexpected benefits beyond the immediate business results. It demonstrated to employees, investors, and community leaders that Rodriguez Development was willing to take risks on people who had proven their commitment to personal and professional growth. It also created a model for how we could support local entrepreneurs who shared our values and vision. But the most significant development came 2 years later, when Derek approached me with his own business proposal. Unlike Kyle's restaurant concept, Derek's idea focused on financial consulting services, specifically designed for small business owners and emerging entrepreneurs. I spent 5 years learning about investment mistakes the hard way, Derek explained during our initial meeting. Now I want to help other people avoid those same mistakes and make informed decisions about business financing and growth strategies. Derek's proposal was more complex than Kyle's had been, involving a comprehensive financial consulting service that would work with Rodriguez Development to help small business tenants in our commercial spaces succeed and expand. His expertise in both traditional finance and alternative investment strategies could provide valuable support for the local entrepreneurs who were increasingly important to our development strategy. This is about more than just financial advice, Derek continued. It's about creating an ecosystem where small businesses can thrive, which makes our developments more successful and more valuable to the communities where we work. The concept made sense, but I wanted to be sure Derek had genuinely learned from his past mistakes, rather than just adapting them to new circumstances. What makes you think you're qualified to give financial advice to other people? I asked directly. Your track record includes losing most of an inheritance through poor investment decisions. Derek nodded, clearly expecting the challenge. Because I've made every mistake you can make with money, and I've learned from all of them. I know what it feels like to confuse speculation with investment, leverage with opportunity, and complexity with sophistication. Most financial advisors learned their lessons from textbooks. I learned mine from real consequences. Derek's honesty was compelling, and his business plan demonstrated genuine understanding of both financial fundamentals and the specific challenges facing small business owners. More importantly, his proposal aligned with Rodriguez Development's community-focused mission while addressing a real need among our commercial tenants. The Derek Rodriguez Financial Consulting Pilot Program launched 18 months later, providing business planning, investment advice, and growth strategy support for small businesses in Rodriguez Development properties. The program proved immediately valuable, helping dozens of entrepreneurs develop more sustainable business models while reducing tenant turnover and increasing property values. Within 3 years, both Kyle and Derek had established successful businesses that contributed to Rodriguez Development's success while creating value independently. Kyle's restaurant group now operated 12 locations across 4 states, while Derek's consulting firm served over 200 small business clients and had expanded beyond our development properties. Miranda, meanwhile, had found her own path to redemption through her work with the nonprofit financial counseling organization. She had become one of their most effective counselors, helping people navigate debt crises and financial rebuilding with empathy born from personal experience. "She's actually quite good at this work," reported Janet Walsh, the nonprofit's director, during a chance encounter at a Phoenix Business Council meeting. Her own experience with financial devastation gives her credibility with clients who might not trust traditional financial advisors. The family reconciliation had evolved gradually and naturally over several years. We weren't close in the way we might have been without the inheritance betrayal, but we had developed mutual respect based on genuine accomplishment and shared values. The most meaningful moment came during the Rodriguez Foundation's 10th anniversary celebration, when Kyle and Derek both spoke about how second chances and hard work had transformed their lives. Their presence at the event, as successful business owners rather than dependent heirs, represented a kind of redemption for all of us. 10 years ago, I was a failed restaurant owner working as a bartender to pay basic expenses, Kyle told the assembled scholarship recipients and community leaders. I thought success was about having things handed to you, about taking shortcuts, and avoiding hard work. I was wrong about everything. Derek's speech was equally reflective. I lost a fortune through poor decisions and lack of discipline, but I gained something more valuable: the understanding that real wealth comes from what you create, not what you inherit. The Rodriguez Foundation represents that principle in action, helping young people build their own success stories. As I listened to my stepbrothers speak about the lessons they had learned through failure and recovery, I realized that the empire I had built encompassed more than just Rodriguez Development or our various business ventures. It included the relationships we had rebuilt, the communities we had strengthened, and the opportunities we had created for other people to achieve their own success. The inheritance my stepfamily had stolen 15 years earlier had been worth perhaps $2 million. The empire I had built in response was worth hundreds of millions. But the real measure of success wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that everything we had accomplished was built on genuine value creation, rather than entitlement or exploitation. Rodriguez Development had grown from a single partnership with Tom Morrison into a multi-billion-dollar company that employed thousands of people and had transformed dozens of communities across the American Southwest. The Rodriguez Foundation had provided scholarships and business support to over 500 young entrepreneurs. Our various business partnerships and community initiatives had created opportunities for hundreds of other people to build their own success stories. But perhaps the most significant achievement was proving that business success and social responsibility could not only coexist but reinforce each other. Every project we completed demonstrated that profit and purpose could be aligned, that sustainable growth came from serving community needs rather than just maximizing financial returns. Standing in my office 15 years after that devastating courthouse encounter, looking out at a city skyline that had been transformed partially through our work, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or recognition. We had built something lasting and meaningful, something that would continue creating value long after any of us were gone. They had left me with nothing, but in doing so they had given me the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to discover what I was truly capable of achieving. The empire we built from that adversity was more valuable than anything they could have given me, precisely because we had earned every piece of it through hard work, innovation, and commitment to serving others. The party they had chosen was over long ago, but the empire built from their rejection would continue growing for decades to come. 20 years after that devastating courthouse encounter, I stood before the United Nations Urban Development Council in New York, delivering a keynote address about sustainable community development in emerging economies. Rodriguez Development had expanded internationally with projects in 12 countries and a reputation as one of the world's leading experts in transformative urban redevelopment. The challenge facing developing cities isn't just about building more housing or commercial spaces, I told the assembled delegates. It's about creating communities that enhance human potential while respecting local culture and environmental sustainability. Our latest venture, the Global Community Initiative, was perhaps the most ambitious project we had ever undertaken. Working with the UN and various national governments, we were implementing community-centered development programs in cities across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. The keynote address had been years in the making. Rodriguez Development's international expansion had begun 5 years earlier when the government of Colombia approached us about redeveloping informal settlements in Medellin. Our success there had led to similar projects in Kenya, Vietnam, and Brazil, each adapted to local conditions but guided by the same principles we had developed in Phoenix. Ms. Rodriguez, came a question from a delegate from Ghana, your company's projects consistently show higher community satisfaction rates than traditional development approaches. What accounts for this difference? We don't build for communities, I replied. We build with communities. Every project begins with extensive consultation with local residents, business owners, and community leaders. We design solutions that address the problems people actually face, not the problems we think they should have. The international work had required learning entirely new sets of skills. Cultural sensitivity, international law, currency fluctuations, and complex political environments all presented challenges that domestic development had never prepared us for. But the core principles remained the same. Listen to communities, solve real problems, create lasting value. After the UN presentation, I had dinner with Dr. James Okafor, our new Director of International Operations. James was a Nigerian-born architect who had joined Rodriguez Development after completing his PhD in sustainable urban planning at MIT. His expertise in cross-cultural design and community engagement had been essential to our international success. The response to your presentation was remarkable, James observed as we discussed the day's meetings. 3 more countries have expressed interest in pilot programs, and the World Bank representative wants to discuss funding partnerships. The growth opportunities were exciting, but also overwhelming. Rodriguez Development now employed over 3,000 people across 4 continents. Managing that scale while maintaining our commitment to community-focused development required constant attention to company culture and operational excellence. I'm concerned that we're growing too fast, I admitted. Each new project requires adapting our methods to different cultural contexts and regulatory environments. How do we maintain quality and consistency while scaling internationally? James had been thinking about the same challenges. I think the answer is developing more local partnerships rather than trying to export our exact model everywhere. We provide the framework and principles, but local partners provide the cultural knowledge and community connections. The conversation reminded me of lessons learned during Rodriguez Development's early growth phases. Every time we had expanded into new markets or project types, we had faced similar questions about maintaining our identity while adapting to new circumstances. The solution had always been finding the right balance between consistency and flexibility, maintaining core values while adapting methods to local conditions. 2 days later, I was back in Phoenix for the Rodriguez Foundation's 15th anniversary celebration. The event was being held in the same warehouse district where I had completed my first major development project, now a thriving mixed-use community with over 2,000 residents and 100 small businesses. The celebration brought together scholarship recipients, community partners, business leaders, and family members to recognize the foundation's impact and discuss future initiatives. Over 15 years, we had provided scholarships to over 800 students, supported 300 small business startups, and created job training programs that had helped thousands of people develop marketable skills. Kyle and Derek were both in attendance, now successful entrepreneurs in their own right. Kyle's restaurant group had expanded to 47 locations across 8 states, while Derek's financial consulting firm served over 800 small business clients and had been recognized as one of the fastest-growing companies in Arizona. It's surreal to think about how different our lives could have been, Derek said during a quiet moment at the reception. If we had managed Dad's inheritance responsibly, we probably would have been comfortable but unremarkable. Instead, losing everything forced us to discover what we were actually capable of achieving. Kyle nodded in agreement. The best thing that ever happened to me was having my restaurant fail spectacularly. It taught me that success requires understanding every aspect of your business, not just the parts that seem interesting or glamorous. Miranda was also present at the celebration, now 71, and serving as a volunteer coordinator for the nonprofit financial counseling organization where she had worked for over a decade. Her transformation from self-centered socialite to dedicated community advocate had been as dramatic as anyone's in our extended family. I see young people struggling with the same kinds of financial decisions that destroyed my life, Miranda told a group of scholarship recipients during a panel discussion. The difference is that now I can help them avoid those mistakes instead of encouraging them. But the most meaningful moment of the evening came when Maria Santos, one of our first scholarship recipients, announced that she was establishing her own foundation focused on supporting young women in engineering and construction. 15 years ago, the Rodriguez Foundation Scholarship allowed me to complete my engineering degree when my family couldn't afford tuition, Maria said during her speech. Today I'm a project manager with Rodriguez Development, working on community infrastructure projects in Colombia. But more importantly, I've learned that success creates the obligation to help others achieve their own success. Maria's foundation represented the kind of ripple effect that made the Rodriguez Foundation's work most meaningful. We weren't just helping individual students complete their education. We were creating a network of successful professionals who were committed to supporting the next generation. After the celebration, I spent time reviewing the foundation's strategic plan for the next 5 years. We were expanding our programs to include international scholarships for students from developing countries, business incubation services for social entrepreneurs, and leadership development programs for community organizers. The expansion reflected Rodriguez Development's own evolution from a local construction company to an international development organization. But it also reflected my growing understanding that business success created opportunities and responsibilities to address larger social challenges. 3 months later, I received a phone call that would test everything we had built over the past 2 decades. Senator Patricia Walsh, chairwoman of the Senate Committee on International Development, was calling to discuss what she described as serious concerns about Rodriguez Development's international operations. Ms. Rodriguez, we've received reports that your company's projects in Africa may be displacing local communities and benefiting foreign investors more than local residents, Senator Walsh said during our conference call. There are also questions about whether your UN partnerships comply with federal regulations regarding international development contracting. The accusations were serious and potentially devastating. If Rodriguez Development was found to be violating international development regulations or harming local communities, we could lose our UN partnerships, face criminal prosecution, and see our reputation destroyed. Senator, I'd like to schedule a meeting to address these concerns directly, I replied. Our projects are extensively documented, and we have independent evaluations from community groups and international observers. I'm confident that a thorough review will show that our work benefits local communities rather than harming them. The investigation that followed was the most challenging period in Rodriguez Development's history. Federal investigators, congressional staff members, and international auditors spent 6 months examining every aspect of our operations in Colombia, Kenya, Vietnam, and Brazil. The scrutiny was intense and often hostile. Critics accused us of development colonialism, using social responsibility rhetoric to mask traditional profit extraction. Others suggested that our community consultation processes were superficial exercises designed to legitimize predetermined development plans. The concern is that you're essentially gentrifying developing communities in the name of improvement, explained Dr. Patricia Chen, a development economist who testified before the Senate committee. Even well-intentioned development can displace existing residents and destroy traditional community structures. The criticism wasn't entirely unfair. Some of our projects had indeed resulted in increased property values that made housing less affordable for original residents. Others had attracted new businesses that competed with traditional economic activities. But the comprehensive investigation also revealed the genuine benefits our projects had created. In Medellin, our work had contributed to a 60% reduction in violent crime and a 40% increase in high school graduation rates. In Nairobi, our mixed-income housing project had provided quality homes for over 5,000 families while creating jobs for 300 local contractors. The data shows that Rodriguez Development's projects consistently improve community outcomes while generating reasonable profits, testified Dr. James Okafor during his congressional hearing. Their consultation processes are more extensive than industry standards, and their community benefit commitments are legally binding rather than voluntary. The investigation concluded 8 months after it began with a mixed but largely favorable report. The Senate committee found that Rodriguez Development had complied with all applicable regulations and had generally delivered the community benefits we had promised. However, they also recommended stronger oversight of international development projects and more rigorous standards for community impact assessment. Rodriguez Development represents both the potential and the challenges of private sector involvement in international development, the committee's final report concluded. Their projects demonstrate that properly managed development can benefit local communities while generating sustainable profits. However, the complexity of cross-cultural development requires continued vigilance to prevent unintended negative consequences. The investigation had been exhausting and stressful, but it also validated the principles and practices we had developed over 2 decades of community-focused development. More importantly, it led to industry-wide improvements in development practices and community engagement standards. 6 months after the congressional investigation concluded, I announced my decision to step back from day-to-day management of Rodriguez Development and focus on longer-term strategic planning and international policy work. Elena Martinez, who had served as our chief operating officer for 8 years, was promoted to president and CEO. 25 years ago, I started this company because I wanted to prove that I could succeed despite being left with nothing, I told our employees during the leadership transition announcement. Today, we've built something that's bigger and more important than proving any individual point. It's time for the next generation of leaders to take Rodriguez Development to even greater heights. Elena's promotion represented a natural evolution in the company's leadership. She had joined Rodriguez Development as a project manager 12 years earlier and had been instrumental in developing our international expansion strategy. Her expertise in sustainable development and community engagement made her ideally suited to guide the company's continued growth. The transition also gave me the opportunity to focus on the Rodriguez Institute for Sustainable Development, a new think tank and research organization dedicated to advancing community-centered development practices worldwide. The institute would conduct research, provide training for development professionals, and advocate for policy changes that prioritize community welfare and development planning. The goal is to influence how development is practiced globally, I explained during the institute's launch event. We want to prove that community-focused development isn't just morally superior, it's more effective at creating lasting positive change. The Institute's first major initiative was a comprehensive study of development projects across 50 cities in 25 countries, comparing community outcomes from different development approaches. The research would provide empirical evidence for the effectiveness of community-centered methods, while identifying best practices that could be replicated elsewhere. But perhaps the most significant development was personal. At 46, I had spent 25 years building a business empire and establishing a global reputation, but I had never prioritized personal relationships or family life. The demands of growing Rodriguez Development had consumed most of my time and energy, leaving little room for the kinds of deep personal connections that made life meaningful. That began to change when I met Dr. Michael Torres during a sustainable development conference in Costa Rica. Michael was an environmental engineer who specialized in renewable energy systems for developing communities. His work complemented Rodriguez Development's focus on sustainable construction and community infrastructure. "I've been following your company's work for years," Michael told me during our first conversation at the conference. The integration of environmental sustainability with community development is exactly what the world needs more of. Our relationship developed slowly, built on shared professional interests and compatible values, rather than romantic intensity. Michael understood the demands of international development work because he faced similar challenges in his own career. More importantly, he was genuinely committed to using his skills to address global challenges, rather than just advancing his personal interests. I've never met anyone who combines business success with social impact as effectively as you do, Michael said during one of our early dates. Most successful entrepreneurs are primarily motivated by profit, while most social activists don't understand how to build sustainable organizations. You've figured out how to align both motivations. 18 months after we met, Michael and I were married in a small ceremony at the Warehouse District Development, where I had achieved my first major success. The guest list included family members, business partners, community leaders, and scholarship recipients from around the world. The extended community that had become more important to me than any traditional social circle. Kyle and Derek both spoke at the wedding, reflecting on how much our family had grown and changed over the past 25 years. Their presence, along with Miranda's, represented a kind of redemption that would have been impossible when we were consumed by bitterness and mutual resentment. 25 years ago, we were a broken family divided by greed and selfishness, Derek said during his toast. Today, we're a chosen family united by shared values and mutual respect. That transformation is Isabella's greatest achievement. Not the business empire she built, but the relationships she repaired and the community she created. The wedding also marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one that balanced professional achievement with personal fulfillment. Michael and I established a home in Phoenix but traveled extensively for our respective work, often coordinating our schedules to work in the same region simultaneously. Our honeymoon was a working trip to Ecuador, where Rodriguez Development was consulting on a sustainable tourism development project and Michael was designing renewable energy systems for remote communities. It was exactly the kind of collaboration that made our relationship both personally satisfying and professionally productive. 2 years after our marriage, Michael and I adopted 2 children from Colombia, siblings whose parents had died in a car accident and who had been living in an understaffed orphanage in Medellin. Sofia was 8 and Carlos was 6 when they joined our family, both bright and resilient despite the trauma they had experienced. We want to give them opportunities to grow and thrive, I told the adoption agency during our final interview. But we also want to honor their Colombian heritage and maintain connections to their cultural roots. Adopting Sofia and Carlos transformed my understanding of what it meant to build a legacy. Rodriguez Development and the Rodriguez Foundation would continue creating value long after I was gone, but raising these children gave me the opportunity to shape the next generation more directly and personally. Sofia showed early aptitude for mathematics and engineering, often accompanying me to construction sites and asking detailed questions about building design and structural systems. Carlos was more interested in art and storytelling, creating elaborate drawings and narratives about the buildings and communities he observed during our travels. I want to build houses for people who don't have them, Sofia announced during her 9th birthday party. Like Mama Isabella does, but even better. Watching my children develop their own interests and aspirations reminded me of the young woman I had been 25 years earlier. Ambitious, determined, but uncertain about how to translate dreams into reality. Their presence in my life added new dimensions to questions about success, purpose, and the kind of world we were creating for future generations. The empire I had built from nothing was no longer just about proving that I could succeed despite adversity. It had become about creating opportunities for other people to achieve their own success, about demonstrating that business and social responsibility could be aligned, and about leaving the world better than I had found it. Standing in my office 30 years after that devastating courthouse encounter, looking out at a city that had been transformed partially through our work, I felt a deep sense of completion that had nothing to do with money or recognition. We had built something lasting and meaningful, something that would continue creating value for generations to come. They had left me with nothing, but in doing so, they had given me everything I needed to discover my true potential. The empire built from their rejection had become a force for positive change that extended far beyond anything they could have imagined. The party they had chosen was over decades ago, but the empire built from their betrayal would continue growing long after any of us were gone. And that, I realized, was the most meaningful inheritance anyone could leave behind. 15 years later, I sat in the boardroom of the Rodriguez Institute for Sustainable Development in Geneva, watching my daughter Sophia present her doctoral research on climate-adaptive urban design to an audience of international development experts. At 23, she had already published papers on resilient infrastructure that were being cited by engineers and planners worldwide. Traditional development models assume stable environmental conditions, Sophia explained, her presentation displaying before and after images from cities affected by climate change. But communities in vulnerable regions need infrastructure that can adapt to rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and shifting precipitation patterns. Her research focused on modular construction techniques that could be easily modified as environmental conditions changed, buildings that could be elevated during flood seasons, expanded during population growth, or relocated if necessary. The concepts were revolutionary, building on Rodriguez Development's community-centered approach while addressing challenges that my generation was only beginning to understand. The key insight, Sophia continued, is that climate adaptation requires community participation from the design phase. Residents understand local environmental patterns better than outside experts, and they're more likely to maintain systems they helped create. In the audience, Carlos took notes on his tablet while live-streaming portions of the presentation for the Rodriguez Foundation's social media channels. At 21, he had developed into a gifted communicator who could translate complex development concepts into compelling narratives that engaged broader public interest. After Sophia's presentation, the three of us had dinner at a small restaurant near Lake Geneva, continuing family traditions of combining work travel with quality time together. "Mama, I've been thinking about your offer to join Rodriguez Development after I finish my PhD," Sophia said, twirling pasta around her fork with the same methodical precision she applied to engineering problems. "But I'm not sure the traditional development model is sufficient for the challenges my generation will face." Her comment didn't surprise me. Sophia had always been more interested in solving problems than preserving existing approaches, even successful ones. At 23, she was already questioning assumptions that had guided my career for 3 decades. "What kind of alternative are you considering?" I asked. "Something more radical. Instead of building permanent communities that hope to withstand climate change, what if we designed settlements that could move with it? Floating cities for rising oceans, modular communities that could be relocated as agricultural zones shift, nomadic infrastructure that follows seasonal migration patterns." Carlos looked up from his tablet. "That sounds like science fiction." "So did sustainable development 30 years ago," Sophia replied. "Mama built her career proving that business success and social responsibility could be aligned. I want to prove that human settlements and environmental change can be aligned too." Her vision was ambitious to the point of seeming impossible, but I recognized the same determination that had driven my own unlikely journey from inheritance rejection to international development leadership. "If you're serious about this direction, you'll need to understand how to build political support and financial backing for radical innovations," I said. "Revolutionary ideas require evolutionary implementation strategies." The conversation reminded me of discussions I'd had with my own mentors 30 years earlier, when my ideas about community-centered development had seemed equally unrealistic to established industry leaders. 2 days later, we returned to Phoenix for the Rodriguez Foundation's 20th anniversary celebration. The event had grown into one of the Southwest's major philanthropic gatherings, attracting business leaders, government officials, and community organizers from across the region. But this year's celebration had special significance. I was announcing my retirement from active involvement in Rodriguez Development and the transition of leadership to the next generation. Elena Martinez would remain as CEO, but Sophia and Carlos would join the company's board of directors and begin taking responsibility for long-term strategic planning. 20 years ago, the Rodriguez Foundation was created to ensure that other young people wouldn't face the obstacles I encountered when building my career, I told the assembled guests. Today, we're proud to announce that 2 of those young people happen to be my own children, who are ready to take our work in directions I never imagined. Sophia's appointment to the board represented more than just family succession. Her expertise in climate-adaptive design was becoming increasingly relevant as Rodriguez's development expanded into regions affected by environmental change. Her doctoral research was already influencing company policies about site selection, construction methods, and community resilience planning. Carlos's role was equally important, but different. His talent for communication and community engagement would be essential as Rodriguez's development worked to maintain its reputation for authentic community partnership while operating at global scale. The next generation of development challenges will require the next generation of solutions, Sophia said during her remarks to the anniversary gathering. We're honored to continue the work that Isabella began, but we're also committed to evolving that work to meet the realities our generation will face. But the most meaningful moment of the evening came when Kyle and Derek presented a special recognition to Miranda, who was now 79 and had been volunteering with financial counseling organizations for 15 years. Our stepmother's transformation from someone who manipulated family relationships for personal gain to someone who dedicates her life to helping others avoid financial mistakes represents the best of what's possible when people commit to genuine change, Kyle said during the presentation. Miranda's acceptance speech was brief but moving. I spent the first 50 years of my life taking things from other people. I've spent the last 15 years trying to give back more than I took. It's not enough to balance the scales, but it's a start. The family reconciliation that had evolved over 2 decades represented something deeper than forgiveness or redemption. It demonstrated that people could genuinely change, that mistakes could become wisdom, and that broken relationships could be rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect and shared values. After the celebration, Michael and I spent a quiet evening at home, reflecting on the transitions that were reshaping our lives. Our marriage had provided stability and companionship that had enriched both of our careers while giving us the foundation for raising Sophia and Carlos. Are you comfortable with stepping back from active management? Michael asked as we sat on the terrace overlooking the city lights of Phoenix. I'm excited about it, I replied honestly. For 30 years, I've been focused on proving that community-centered development could work at scale. Now Sophia and Carlos have the opportunity to prove that it can evolve to meet challenges we're only beginning to understand. Michael had recently accepted a position as Director of Renewable Energy Development for the United Nations, coordinating clean energy projects in developing countries. His work complemented the Rodriguez Institute's research, while giving him the platform to influence international energy policy. The kids are going to face challenges we never had to deal with, Michael observed. Climate change, technological disruption, political instability. The world they're inheriting is more complex and more fragile than the one we've known. But they're also inheriting tools and knowledge that we didn't have, I replied. They understand global systems, technological capabilities, and environmental science in ways that our generation had to learn through trial and error. 6 months after the leadership transition, Sophia announced her first major initiative as a Rodriguez Development Board member, the Adaptive Communities Project, a research and demonstration program that would create prototype settlements designed to thrive despite environmental uncertainty. We're going to build the world's first truly climate-adaptive community, Sophia explained during her presentation to the company's senior leadership. A place where every building, every system, every infrastructure component is designed to respond positively to environmental change, rather than just resist it. The project would be located in the Netherlands, in partnership with Dutch engineering firms that specialized in flood management and sustainable design. The community would serve as a living laboratory for technologies and social systems that could be replicated in vulnerable regions worldwide. This isn't just about building better buildings, Sophia continued. It's about creating new models for how humans can live in harmony with changing environmental conditions, rather than fighting against them. The Adaptive Communities Project represented exactly the kind of innovative thinking that had always driven Rodriguez Development's success. We had built our reputation by taking on challenges that other developers avoided, and Sophia was proposing to tackle the biggest challenge of her generation. Carlos's contribution to the project would be equally important. His role was to document the community development process and create educational materials that could help other regions implement similar approaches. His storytelling skills would be essential for communicating complex technical concepts to diverse audiences. People need to understand not just how these technologies work, but why they matter for their own communities, Carlos explained during a team planning meeting. The best innovations fail if they can't be explained and adopted by ordinary people. 2 years into the Adaptive Communities project, Sofia and Carlos presented their preliminary findings to the Global Climate Adaptation Conference in Copenhagen. Their research was generating international attention and attracting partnerships with governments and organizations from around the world. The adaptive communities approach represents a fundamental shift from resistance-based to integration-based climate response, Sofia told the conference audience. Instead of building walls to keep the ocean out, we're building communities that can rise with the tide. The presentation included case studies from the Netherlands prototype, showing how modular construction techniques, floating foundations, and flexible infrastructure systems could maintain community functionality despite significant environmental changes. But the most impressive aspect of their work was the social innovation component. Sofia and Carlos had developed community engagement processes that helped residents participate actively in adapting their built environment to changing conditions. The technology is only half the solution, Carlos explained during his portion of the presentation. The other half is creating social systems that empower communities to manage their own adaptation processes rather than depending on outside experts. Their work was attracting attention from organizations far beyond the development industry. The European Union had provided funding for 3 additional adaptive communities demonstrations, while the World Bank was incorporating their methods into climate resilience guidelines for vulnerable regions. Watching Sofia and Carlos present their research to world leaders and policy experts, I felt the same pride and amazement that I had experienced watching them take their first steps as children. They had taken the principles I had spent decades developing and evolved them into solutions for challenges I could barely have imagined. But perhaps the most gratifying aspect of their success was that it validated the long-term vision that had guided Rodriguez's development from the beginning. By focusing on community needs rather than just financial returns, by prioritizing innovation over convention, and by measuring success through social impact rather than just profit margins, we had created an organization capable of evolving to meet whatever challenges the future might bring. At 61, I found myself in the unexpected position of being an elder stateswoman in the development industry, sought out for advice and perspective by younger professionals who were facing their own complex challenges. The role was both honor and responsibility, requiring me to share lessons learned while remaining open to new approaches I hadn't considered. The most important thing I've learned, I told a group of emerging development professionals during a mentoring session, is that sustainable success comes from aligning your work with purposes larger than yourself. When your primary motivation is serving community needs rather than advancing personal interests, you find solutions that create lasting value for everyone involved. The mentoring work was personally fulfilling, but it also served broader strategic purposes. By developing the next generation of community-focused development professionals, we were creating a network of leaders who would carry forward the principles and practices that had guided our work for 3 decades. Rodriguez's development itself continued to grow and evolve under Elena's leadership, with projects now operating in over 20 countries and total portfolio value exceeding $10 billion. But the company's most important achievement wasn't financial. It was the demonstration that large-scale development could prioritize community welfare while remaining profitable and sustainable. The Rodriguez Foundation had provided scholarships and business support to over 2,000 recipients, creating a global network of leaders who were applying community-centered approaches in fields ranging from education and healthcare to technology and environmental conservation. But as I reflected on 35 years of work building something meaningful from the ashes of family betrayal, I realized that the true measure of success wasn't what we had accomplished. It was what Sofia, Carlos, and thousands of other young leaders would accomplish with the tools and opportunities we had created for them. They had left me with nothing 35 years ago, but in doing so they had inadvertently given me the motivation to build something that would outlast any of us. The empire born from their rejection had become a global force for positive change, and the next generation was already taking it in directions I had never imagined. The story that had begun with loss and betrayal had become a story of renewal and possibility, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the most devastating setbacks. The party my stepfamily had chosen was a distant memory, but the empire built from their cruelty would continue growing and evolving for generations to come. And that, I knew, was a legacy worth more than any inheritance they could have given me. The courthouse steps felt cold beneath my feet as I stood there clutching the manila envelope that contained the remnants of my 26-year-old life. The lawyer's words still echoed in my head like a death sentence. Unfortunately, Ms. Rodriguez, your father's will was quite specific. The entire estate, the house, the construction company, all investments and assets, goes to your stepmother Miranda and her twin sons Kyle and Derek. You are not mentioned anywhere in the document. Inside the courthouse, I could see Miranda laughing with Kyle and Derek, already planning their celebration dinner at the Phoenician resort. They were discussing which of Dad's vintage cars they'd keep, which properties they'd sell first, and how quickly they could liquidate Rodriguez and Associates Construction, the company my father had spent 32 years building from nothing. Don't look so devastated, Izzy, Derek had said with a smirk as they passed me on the courthouse steps. You've got that fancy engineering degree from ASU. You can build your own empire, right? Kyle had laughed at his twin brother's cruel joke. Maybe she can start with a lemonade stand and work her way up. Their laughter had followed me as they climbed into Dad's Mercedes, the same car he'd taught me to drive when I turned 16, the one he'd always said would be mine someday. Now, 3 months after Dad's sudden heart attack at 58, I understood how thoroughly I'd been outmaneuvered. Miranda had spent the 2 years since marrying my father systematically poisoning our relationship. She'd convinced him I was ungrateful, that I only called when I needed money, that I cared more about my graduate studies than my family. She'd intercepted emails and phone calls, creating a narrative of neglect and selfishness that bore no resemblance to reality. The worst part was discovering that Dad's construction company had been quietly transferred to Miranda 6 months before his death. She'd convinced him it was for tax planning and estate optimization. Now she was fielding offers from competitors who wanted to buy the company for its contracts and client relationships, planning to strip it for parts and walk away with 30 years of my father's work. I had exactly $2,847 in my checking account, a master's degree in structural engineering, and nowhere to live. My teaching assistant position had ended when I graduated, and my student apartment lease expired in 2 weeks. Miranda had made it clear that I was no longer welcome in what had been my family home since age 12, when Dad had married her after Mom's death from cancer. The first night in my new studio apartment in Central Phoenix, I lay on an air mattress I'd bought at Walmart and stared at the water-stained ceiling, listening to sirens and domestic disputes from neighboring units. The building should have been condemned years ago. The elevator rarely worked, the plumbing was unreliable, and my third-floor apartment reached 90 degrees on summer afternoons despite the struggling air conditioning unit. But it was $625 a month including utilities, which meant I could afford rent and groceries while looking for work. My neighbors included night shift warehouse workers, other recent college graduates drowning in student loans, and people whose circumstances had forced them into Phoenix's most affordable housing market. Finding employment proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. The construction industry was struggling through an economic downturn, and most companies wanted experienced engineers, not recent graduates with impressive GPAs, but no practical field experience. After 8 weeks of rejection letters and disappointing interviews, I finally accepted a position with Morrison Construction for $38,000 annually, barely enough to cover rent, student loan payments, and basic living expenses. Tom Morrison, the company's 62-year-old owner, was a practical man who'd built his mid-sized commercial renovation business through 30 years of careful work and modest growth. During my interview, he'd been blunt about the position's limitations. "You've got the book learning," he'd said, studying my transcript and recommendation letters. "But theory and practice are different animals in this business. You'll start as a junior project coordinator, which means you'll do whatever needs doing, filing paperwork, running errands, babysitting subcontractors, cleaning up job sites. If you can prove you understand how construction actually works, we'll talk about giving you real responsibilities." I threw myself into the work with desperate intensity. While other employees left promptly at 5 o'clock, I stayed late studying project specifications, learning about materials and building codes, researching new construction technologies, and project management techniques. I volunteered for every difficult assignment, every problematic project, every job that seasoned employees tried to avoid. Meanwhile, Miranda and her sons were enjoying their newfound wealth with the enthusiasm of lottery winners. Through mutual friends and social media, I heard about their expensive vacations. Kyle posting photos from Cabo San Lucas, Derek bragging about his new BMW, Miranda joining the Scottsdale Country Club and hosting elaborate dinner parties. Kyle had used a portion of his inheritance to purchase a franchise location of a trendy burger restaurant, spending more time promoting his entrepreneurial success on Instagram than learning restaurant management fundamentals. Derek had invested heavily in cryptocurrency and day trading, convinced that his business degree and natural intelligence would make him wealthy through financial speculation. 6 months into my position at Morrison Construction, I was promoted to junior project manager and assigned my first independent responsibility, renovating a 40,000 square foot office building that had suffered extensive flood damage. The project was considered a nightmare. The insurance company was fighting the claim. The budget was impossibly tight. The timeline was unrealistic, and structural inspections had revealed problems that previous contractors had missed or ignored. "This one's a real test," Tom warned me as he handed over the project files. The original contractor walked away when they discovered foundation issues. The building owner is frustrated and threatening lawsuits. Everyone thinks the whole structure might be a total loss. I spent 3 weeks analyzing the structural problems, consulting with engineering specialists, researching innovative repair techniques, and developing a comprehensive plan that could salvage the building within the revised budget constraints. The solution involved using a new type of carbon fiber reinforcement system that was less expensive than traditional steel reinforcement, but required precise engineering calculations and installation procedures. As I finished the final calculations and looked at the comprehensive repair plan spread across my desk, something clicked into place. This wasn't just about saving a flood-damaged building. This was proof that I could see solutions where others saw only problems, that I could innovate under pressure, that I could turn disasters into opportunities. Derek's mocking words echoed in my mind. "You can build your own empire, right?" For the first time since that devastating day on the courthouse steps, I smiled, because I was beginning to realize that's exactly what I was going to do. They had left me with nothing. No inheritance, no family support, no safety net. But in taking everything away, they had unwittingly given me something far more valuable. The burning determination to prove that empires aren't inherited, they're built. And I was just getting started. The end.